on to rock, get up to burn. Tell me the fight, ever be your desire. One day I noticed that my life was broken. It was not me who was controlling this body. Oh, I want to know what's really real to me before it vanishes like a wave. Get on the rock, get up the burn. Tell me the fight on me, the ways to make it. You must have heard it. Grasp the truth, hold it high. Ride the beast, that's what is made to start with. You haven't heard it, girl. Don't be afraid to listen to your own heart. Beat the sonic, that's my heartbeat in you. One day I noticed that the world was broken. Spoiled out hell, we had our senses down. Oh, I would see this whole world falling blue. Not this space marched in black. Hey, get on the rock, get up the bar, tell me the fight.
In today's Remnant 2 video, I'm going to share with you a build focusing on mod damage and specifically for explosions and fire. The build works very well even on Apocalypse difficulty. I have made a lot of tests and I'm going to share with you all the mods what works best for flying bosses, ground bosses, the same goes for all kinds of enemies. Let's start with archetypes. Of course, the first archetype is the Archon, the king of mod damage. Then we need a secondary archetype that focuses on all damage or mod damage. The highest that has mod damage is the Summoner, and then my personal favorite is the Medic because we have a little more survivability, a little more utility, and it increases all damage compared to something like the Hunter that only increases range damage. And we're using the Archon as a prime archetype because we have a lot of mod generation and the game is mod generation. Let's start with the rings. My personal favorites are Burden of the Follower. We don't care about fire rate. 99.9% of the time we're going to use the mods, and this is the best mod generation ring you can find. Burden of the Destroyer increases our damage by 50% for everything. One of the best highest DPS rings in case you don't care about your firearm damage. Stone of Malevolence. This is excellent when we're using the fire mods because this will increase the generation of mod exponentially, making instant generating mods, so I highly recommend it. Now for more damage, we go for the Shard Band ring. 12% extra mod damage is always welcome. Blasting Cup ring, 10% extra explosive damage, always welcome in case we go using a lot of explosions. Firestone ring, once again a good alternative if you're using fire damage. That will increase by 10%, and as an extra 15% resistance. And of course the Bright Steel ring because we need some survivability. In case you don't care, I care for survivability for Apocalypse. I want to tank a couple of hits, so I'm using the combination of Bright Steel ring with the heaviest armor, which we'll explore later. Moving on to the Amulets. 3 options I highly recommend. Detonation Trigger, my personal favorite. I focus a lot on explosive damage, and all your explosives not only deal 25% extra damage, but also apply burning, which is very good. However, if you don't have this, you can use something like the Golden Ribbon, which increases your mod damage by 25%, and activated mode gains you haste for 15%, for example. Or if you're focusing on the fire damage, the best amulet by far is Talisman of the Sun. 20% extra fire damage and burning an extra 50% damage, which burning is a huge DPS increase, especially for the mods we're going to see now as moving on to the video. Moving on to the weapons. So for primary weapons, you don't probably care what you're using. 99% of the time you're going to use the mods. Use whatever you feel comfortable. And I personally use once again the AR-47 just to pick up some enemies in case I want to shoot them. However, your secondary weapon is basically your primary weapon. I use the Meridian because the Screamer mod is a rocket that deals a lot of damage. It has huge range, It's very fast, deals a lot of damage, applies burn with our amulets, and this is what I highly recommend to use. And of course, if you don't have the Meridian, you can use the Hellfire because it has an explosive shot. Although instead of 5 mod shots, you have 2 explosive shots. It has a little bit higher radius, and instead of a rocket, you just throw an explosion that has a lower range. It's pretty decent, but I highly recommend to use the Meridian as your primary weapon of choice. For the Mutators, I'm using Feedback for primary weapon, Harmonizer for secondary weapon usually. You can make a switch arrow. However, Feedback is important in case you want to rush to the level and have a lot of mod generation for your primary weapon, which is excellent, especially it can pick up a lot of enemies. Harmonizer, I use it for the secondary weapon for me because this is my highest DPS mod, the rockets from the Meridian, and that's why I use this combination like this. For the mods, we have a lot of options, and I can probably dedicate a whole video only for the mods for this combination. However, let's talk about the highlights. My personal favorite is Tremor, especially against trash and when you rush through the enemies. It has a lot of stagger damage, AoE damage, and why this is the best and most important, no friendly fire. You can shoot it, you can stand in the Tremor, and you won't die. In comparison, for example, the rocket from the Meridian, if you're too close and you haven't taken the proper traits, you instantly die. However, with the Tremor, there is no such thing. You stagger the enemies, you apply fire, and that's why it's my personal recommendation against trash. However, it doesn't work so well against most of the bosses, so for them we're going to use other combination of mods. Firestorm and Witchfire are the reasons we have named this build Fiery Explosions. Both of them deal a lot of damage, apply huge amounts of burn, and generate mod power like crazy. Especially Firestorm, you can shoot a couple in the boss and generate literally infinite number of rockets against the boss and spam the Meridian rocket launcher. However, this has a huge downside for both cases. Witchfire has a specific area that some bosses won't be reachable, and Firestorm can be a double-edged sword. It can pull you towards it and instantly kill you unless you have kinship. To be more precise, full 10 out of 10 kinship, you probably instantly die, especially for Apocalypse difficulty. However, the upside, huge mod generation power, huge damage, and you will be surprised. I basically soloed the Huntress by just using Witchfire because the Firestorm just was pulling the boss towards Firestorm and it couldn't do anything. So against certain bosses it works better, and it works against some flying bosses. For the Mother Hive, you can shoot Firestorm, apply on top of her, and just simply use your rockets to finish her off. Here are some other cool mobs you can try. The Space Crabs count as explosions, and they also don't deal friendly fire, which is excellent against some bosses and where you deal with a lot of trash. I tried Helix, but for now I'm a little unimpressed. It underperforms compared to all of the other mods I have tested. It's pretty okay if you haven't unlocked anything yet, however, just use the others if you haven't unlocked them. And the final mob I found interesting was Prismatic Driver, because it's basically a beam that constantly explodes. So if you like to just aim your weapon and don't want to just spam the mods like the Meridian and stuff like that, this could be a nice alternative option. Although it lacks the DPS, it has pretty good sustained damage and probably will never run out of mod power. I also tried a pretty fair share of boss weapons to see how they work. For example, the Star Killer in Remnant 1, it had a similar weapon, a very insane mod. However, now it's very slow and the damage is unimpressive until they buff it a little bit. I personally don't like it and don't recommend it, especially against the other options we have. Faelin is something I really wanted to work. However, once again, it underperforms compared to the other options we have. I want to probably make a different build compared to one we have now to just combine a little bit of range damage and mod damage compared now that we need to focus on mod damage and maximize its potential. The same problem I had with Alpha/Omega. It's a pretty decent weapon, you get it after defeating the final boss. However, focusing on only the Beta Ray mod is not as effective compared to the other options we have, although I probably will try another build with having different combination of stats. For the Relic, I personally like Shielded Heart because I can shield myself beforehand, have the passive healings from the lifesteal and passive regeneration, and I'm using the shards with mod damage, elemental damage, and mythic health for a little more survivability and a little bit of extra damage. Let's talk about armor. That's why we're using the ring to have the best roll despite having Lithos Armor Mark II. However, for some reason, the Labyrinth Gauntlets offer more armor compared to the Lithos Gauntlets Mark II, so this is the best combination, have the highest armor possible to just be able to tank a couple of hits, and with the Shielded Heart, if you shield yourself beforehand, it's very hard to die even from usually things that will one-shot you in Apocalypse. Finally, let's talk about traits. Vigor is a must because we go in Apocalypse and we want a lot of health for survivability. Spirit, once again the must, as much as possible mod generation. The more mod power generation you have, the more frequent you use the mods and more damage you deal in just comparison. Expertise is yes or no. If you're using your skills frequently, yes, use expertise. If you don't rely on your skills frequently, this is a kind of a flex slot, although skills usually increase your damage or survivability, so I highly recommend it. 45 extra 50% armor effectiveness for maximum survivability. Regrowth maximum 1.5 per health regen is what I really love. Now for Bark Skin, I'm going 9 points because I don't have enough, and the extra 1% damage reduction because we have some diminishing returns, we don't get as much benefit. And finally I go with Siphoner, 10 out of 10. 3% lifesteal is surprisingly very well because it works with your mods and you're gaining a lot of lifesteal and survivability. In case you're using Firestorm or Witchfire as your primary mod everywhere, Kinship is a must. 80% less friendly fire applies to yourself, and this way, even on Apocalypse, as you can see in the background, you can survive your own mod fire in case something goes wrong. Otherwise, one small just misstep or the firestorm just come to you or the boss just bring the firestorm to you, it's instant death. So yes, use it in case you use these mods, I highly recommend it, or once you get a little more experience, you can just take a risk for yourself. This is my whole setup, feel free to take a screenshot. I only switch my primary weapon mode to Firestorm in case I go against specific bosses, and I probably can switch my amulet to the Sun Amulet for extra fire damage, but usually this is my setup, this is what I go for Apocalypse. So far so good, I didn't have a lot of problems against most type of variety of bosses, and it works excellent. It's a, most importantly, very fun build because I don't know about you, but I do love exploding and staggering even the biggest enemies to death. And that was it for today's video. I really hope this will help you build your own variation of exploding Fury mod damage build for Remnant 2. Now, one final full boss in Apocalypse difficulty in case you're just interested to see in the end of the video. Or you can also like and subscribe to stay tuned for more upcoming videos for Remnant 2 and other video games. And until next time.